Welcome boys and girls, Costini here with a discussion about the ogres in Total War Warhammer 3 and how Creative Assembly not only did an amazing job with their rework, but have redefined expectations about how a race should work and how a racial rework should work. In fact, I would dare say that the majority of racial reworks and improvements that they've started introducing with Thrones of Decay have been fairly solid. Not all of them. You can look at Nurgle, to some extent you can look at Greenskins, but if you look at Khorne, if you look at Ogres, if you look at the Empire, if you look at the Dwarves, holy hell, if you look at the Dwarves, if you look at Kislev, there is a fantastic effort from Creative Assembly. But I would say that out of all the races affected by reworks ever since Thrones of Decay came out, the Ogres do stand out, because not only do they end up having an amazing rework, but Creative Assembly has managed to actually resolve several long-standing issues in Total War, and in a lot of ways redefine our expectations of a campaign. You can also perhaps look to some extent at what they did with Khorne, but I do think that Ogres do end up winning by quite a bit. So first and foremost, it is worth saying that the Ogres pre-rework were easily one of the worst races in the game. In fact, all of the pre-order bonus races have been pretty horrible in Total War for the most part. It's only situations where you get pre-order bonus, but you get the race later on, like the Amazons, where you end up with something better. But a lot of times you look at Ogres, you look at Warriors of Chaos, hell, you even look at Ogre Kingdoms with the yellow turbans at launch as opposed to their DLC. Just not really great design with regards to that. So hopefully Creative Assembly has learned some lessons with that. So it is a good thing that they took one of the worst races and vastly improved their situation in terms of racial design. But what is even better is how they made this race work in a way that very few other races in the game actually do functions, and made them very thematic. So consider the Ogres in the lore. Ogres are a neutral faction. They have no bone in the fight. Well, they kind of do to some extent, right? In as much as everyone wants to keep living, so to some extent everyone's going to oppose chaos destroying the world, to be sure. But Ogres can work for any single faction, can work for any single race in terms of alliances. So you can work together with the Order Tide, but you can also work together with Chaos. It is going to be your decision making in that respect that's going to make a function. Sure, things like Nurgle, for instance, they will hate you. There is some aversion with people like Nurgle, with some other factions here and there, but it's never a game-breaking level of aversion. You're more incentivized to seek out ties with the Order Tide, but you can also make Chaos Ogres a thing if you so desire, for a number of reasons. That is a great situation because it really pushes this idea that you're really playing a neutral faction, which is certainly something that was lacking with Ogres before. To be sure, you do have certain factions that will be enemies, if you will, in your campaign. There are certainly some factions that are going to oppose you more often than not. Grimgor is always going to attack you if you're playing as Greasers, for instance, unless you really give him a good amount of stuff, like maybe, you know, taking Zarnagrund and selling it to him. But in a lot of ways, you do have that choice and flexibility, and that is fantastic, because throughout the history of Total War, they've never really managed to give us this feeling of like kind of neutral faction or neutral race that's up for hire. Now, sure, it is better in Maneater's campaign because he has that kind of unique mechanic, but in every Ogre campaign you have that kind of flexibility, especially because of the bounties. Now, things could have been a bit better with the bounties. I do feel like some of these bounties end up just being pretty bad. I think the system of bounties and even mercenary contracts could have been improved, but make no mistake, this is the closest we've gotten to having a really great system of dynamic objectives where you're merc for hire, which, yeah, that is very unique in Total War, as opposed to just the regular idea of like, we'll build an empire, we'll conquer territory, we'll expand across the map, we'll engage in questionable diplomacy, but it's never really going to work. They've made it work as close as possible with ogres. It's still not perfect, but it is as close to that kind of playstyle as we've ever gotten in Total War. That is one really great design choice from Creative Assembly over there. Another thing also worth mentioning with the ogres is how they took a race that only had 2 legendary lords, added a third, and then made every single ogre campaign, simply put, fantastic. Like, be it Greasus, Scrag, or Maneater, these are amazing campaigns and very unique campaigns at the same time. There are races with double the legendary lords, not more than double the legendary lords of ogres that don't even have half the uniqueness of the individual campaigns that ogres have. So if we consider the various mechanics of ogres, the various campaigns of ogres, if we look at Greece, and it's not just a question of like just unique campaign mechanics, though obviously that does play a role. But if you're playing as Greasus, you have the Mountains of Morn. You have that diplomatic benefit with ogres, so you can confederate them, ally them, etc., etc. Right? So you do have that kind of power in a campaign. But then you add Tyrant's Demands, which incentivize you to get a lot of gold and use that gold to gain significant power, including meat or taking settlements or disbanding armies, stealing ancillary items. It is a fantastic system. But then we look at Scrag's system of a campaign. With Scrag, who's apparently gone on a little adventure in Tylea, but with Scrag, you have a campaign situation where you have a legendary lord in a pretty interesting situation right there, because like you've got the Empire on one side, you've got the Dwarves on the other, you've got Greenskins and the entirety of Badlands on another, and you get to choose there. But what's really fantastic about Scrag is he is genuinely one of the best casters in the game on a faction-wide level. Like, this guy, like, the amount of bullshit Scrag can do with his armies in a campaign is ridiculous. Like, there are powerful armies you can make. There's powerful stacks. Some people will say, oh, it's just a powerful hero stack. No, it's not just a powerful hero stack. It's because of the faction effects that Scrag ends up doing exceptionally well. Like, consider this. He can make an army in his campaign that is full caster, that is really good in melee, but also has unlimited winds of magic. That is fucking absurd, and pretty much unlimited healing, or a significant level of healing. That is a really absurd playstyle. Initially, I was a bit disappointed when I just looked at faction effects, but then I put them in practice, and it's like, holy shit, this guy is awesome in terms of his campaign mechanics. So that is a campaign, and then obviously, you know, you have Maneater over there with all of his contracts, his dynamic campaign, World Wandering. So you end up with 3 very distinct campaigns in the same race, but their campaign priorities are different, their campaign mechanics are different, the playstyles are different. There's pros and cons for each of them. And I have to say that it is rare to have a situation where you look at a race and you can say each of their legendary lords is awesome to play. And I say this as someone who's thousands of hours in the game, right? In fact, for pretty much every other race in the game, you might have some of the campaigns really awesome to play, but then others are disappointing, right? Like with Khorne, for instance, you can genuinely say that, yeah, you know, Scarbrand and Arbol are pretty good, but then Skulltaker is just not that great, as just an example. Then you have races where only one campaign is really worth playing, or maybe 2 campaigns are worth playing. But here, every single campaign out of the 3, all of them are worth playing one way or another. So even if you don't own Omens of Destruction, you just have the Ogre race pack, you'll have a great time. I was questioning how Creative Assembly would do that. In fact, my personal expectation before the release of Omens of Destruction is, yes, they're going to release Maneater, it's going to be an awesome campaign, I imagine, I had hoped. But the question was, is the Ogre race pack going to be worth playing? To which my answer is, yes, it actually is worth purchasing just the Ogre race pack. You might get more value to some extent with Maneater, but you do get a good amount of value as well in terms of the campaign dynamics and the fun campaigns with the Ogre race pack. So that is a great situation to work with during the course of a campaign. So be it the dynamic objectives, the diplomacy, the uniqueness of campaigns. But then we go even further. And I think like the camp system of the ogres is something that really sets them apart from every other race that we've had in the game. See, Creative Assembly for many years has tried to do this idea of like, okay, we're going to have these nomadic factions, or we're going to have these factions or races of limited territorial control or limited recruitment centers and all that. And it never ends up working because Total War inherently is based on around empire building. But this is where the new camp system goes in, because of the brilliance, really, of a lot of design decisions. But it's not just the camps. So there are three things you got to consider when it comes to your campaign in Warhammer 3. 1, economy. 2, hero capacity. 3, unit recruitment. Well, this is where things get really brilliant from Creative Assembly's design decisions with ogres. Every single hero for the ogres can be recruited at tier 2 in regular settlements. And all of them can increase their capacity at tier 3. So firebellies, butchers, hunters, bruisers, they all can be recruited and increase capacity in regular settlements. Your regular unit roster in normal settlements is pretty good, but of course a lot of the really good recruitment is going to be happening in ogre camps. But this is where things get really good for ogre camps, because ogre camps don't cost money, they cost meat, which is its own resource. And having this one resource that you can just pour in a single camp, well, you can get the tier 5 settlement naturally in an ogre campaign without like some of the bullshit cheese that you can use in, say, Karl Franz campaign or Elven campaign to get a tier 5 settlement. You can get a tier 5 settlement through just regular gameplay in a campaign and unlock all of the sweet, sweet, sweet unit recruitment. And this is fantastic because, first off, you don't have an incentive like in every other campaign. In virtually every other campaign, the incentive is that you want to expand as widely as possible because that's going to give you more money, which in turn you can use to develop certain provinces as well. With an ogre campaign, you don't need to do that. In fact, holding a lot of territory, sure, it ends up being useful if you want to make a lot of heroes. Though again, there's plenty of ways of increasing hero capacity. But in ogre campaign, you just want a handful of camps, but high-level camps, because it's going to be far more beneficial than having a bunch of lower-level camps in your campaign. We could talk about how many turns it takes to take a camp and resell it and all that kind of stuff. Sure, some issues over there. Again, it's not perfect, but you end up with an enormous amount of unit variety, with an enormous amount of just significant power. There's still some issues like some of the recruitment durations for units, like you look at Iron Guts, you look at Firebellies and all that. A lot of the cool stuff does take a while to recruit, but you end up with really powerful and really diverse armies very early on. And this is genuinely fun. Sure, very early on, within like 20 turns of campaign, you might just recruit a bunch of Ogre Bulls, some Nobblers, a couple of heroes. But once you get to the point where you're recruiting an army that's starting to look like this, where you get cavalry, artillery, melee units, range units even, things do start changing dramatically. And that is a really great design because they've made it work for a race to have a limited amount of territory and yet still feel as good as a race that may have a vast amount of territory. And that is something that Creative Assembly has struggled with for a long time. And this is really how Ogre should not be about controlling a lot of territory. They should be about, but you still need that recruitment, those recruitment centers, you need hero capacity. But with camps, which you can, yes, it might have a cooldown time, but at least you can move them from one territory to another. You can put them in the middle of friendly territory or enemy territory if you so desire, and you can make them work in that situation. So fantastic system with the camps. I do greatly appreciate the idea that it is using a unique resource, and you get a lot of meat anyway in a campaign, and you have an incentive to fight battles, but then transfer the meat back to your core territories to make it useful. So you can develop camps. Like, you can play an entire Ogre campaign with just 1 or 2 camps. You don't need to even stack up on a ridiculous number of camps in a campaign because it will not be necessary in a lot of different ways. So I think that is a really great design from Creative Assembly with regards to how they've managed how they've really managed to rework the Ogre to be a really fun, really interesting race, but also very thematic to what they should be. And my point on this, if Creative Assembly is looking to make another game in the Total War series, I believe firmly that instead of using the same old tired settlement system that they've been using since Rome 2, that something like the Ogres, or even Khorne, like you can look at Khorne. Khorne doesn't have camps, but again, Khorne has that same kind of benefit of like not necessarily needing more than 2 provinces in an entire campaign. Doesn't matter how long it is. Like, sure, you might want more for hero capacity and all that kind of stuff, but you may not need more than 2 proper provinces in a Khorne campaign besides hero capacity because of, recruitment. But I think this should showcase how things could be handled better by CA going forward in Total War. So just really a fantastic job, something that cannot be praised enough, and hopefully we are finally going to move past the freaking legacy of Rome 2 and Attila. Hopefully. We will see in the future with their next Total War game, whatever they might be working on. Though if rumors are to be believed, it is going to be Total War Warhammer 40k. Or what kind of title you want to go for that. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Costin signing out. If you do enjoy my content, please do consider donating via PayPal or Patreon. Would be greatly appreciated. It does help me keep me going. Things are pretty rough around the world at the moment. Stay tuned.